Hey guys, welcome to Bookish Islander. My name is Juan. I hope you're all doing very well. Today I'm very excited because I'm doing something completely new. Let me tell you about it. A while ago, I did a buddy read, a fantastic buddy read of The Topeka School by Lerner with Sarah from Hardcover Hearts. We had incredibly fruitful and insightful conversations about this book as part of our buddy read. And then we thought it would be a shame if those conversations were just kept between us. So we've decided to create a series of videos that we are calling Deep in Conversation. Now, these are going to be 3 videos. The first video is already up. And in that video, Sarah from Hardcover Hearts talks about some of the themes, the plot, the setting. She sets up the book and she talks about her initial impressions and also our experience as buddy readers, how different Sarah and I are when it comes to responding to books, even to the same material. That's not to say that we're not compatible. Far from it. We're actually very compatible, I think, as readers. She tends to take a more emotional approach to books, or she judges books. I think she looks at book in terms of how they impact her emotionally more than I do. And she seems to think that I'm a little bit more rational or intellectual in my approach. I think that really depends on the book. And I am open to exploring emotional responses to books too. But I think what's important when looking at a book, or at least what's important to me, and it's how I approach books, is trying to work out what the author is trying to do and then assess whether he or she is doing that successfully or not. But be that as it may, the important thing is that we found, as we were reading this book together, that we were quite complementary. Our opinions and our insights on the book complemented each other nicely. So I felt like reading this book, The Topeka School with Sarah from Hardcover Hearts, gave me lots of insights into it that I wouldn't otherwise have. And that brings me to this series, In Deep Conversation, The Topeka School. Okay, so In Deep Conversation is a format that we're trying out. Like I said, it's going to be 3 videos. The first video is already up, and you can, if you're not subscribed to Sarah's channel, or if you're not familiar with her, and I think that's unlikely, but if you're not, go to my description box right now. You'll find a link to the first video, because both her first video and this video response were published exactly at the same time. So go click on that, watch her video, subscribe to her channel if you haven't already, if you like what you see, and then come back and watch this second video. Then there's going to be a third video. At the end of this current video, I shall post a few questions. I shall address some questions directly to Sarah, and she'll be responding to those questions and giving her final assessment of the novel in her third and final video. Now, depending on when you're watching this video right now, her response to it might already be up. So when we originally published this video and the first video by her, the third video will not be available yet. But because you may be watching this 3 months into the future, or even years from now, the third video, her response might be available. So the best thing to do, you can do one of 2 things. You can go check my description box for a link to her third video, or go back to her channel. We've also created playlists. So there is a playlist in her channel for this In Conversation series, and there is another one on my channel. So you can also, so I guess you can do 3 things actually. You can go, the third option would be to go and check out the playlists for the 3 videos. I suggest that you watch them in order because they will make more sense, and I think that's when you will get the full experience. So before I go into the Topeka School and, more importantly, answer the questions that Sarah left me in her first video, I wanted to talk a little bit more about this project and why we are doing it. I think Sarah explained this very well in her video, but I just wanted to add my own piece, if I may. To me, this is a great opportunity to present the results and the conclusions of my buddy read, in this case with Sarah, but it could be future buddy reads with other booktubers, in a way that goes a little bit more in depth than these things normally tend to go. So doing buddy reads is a great way to get the most out of books, and it's also a great way to socialize and get to know other booktubers or whoever you're buddy reading books with. But then those conversations tend to stay private and nobody is privy to them and nobody knows what we're talked about. And so we were trying to find out a way that would work for us, but more importantly, it would work for viewers of both of our channels, so that you could get something out of our buddy read as well. And in the case of the Topeka School, believe me, there is a lot to talk about. So before I go into that, just one final warning. If you haven't read the Topeka School, want to do it, don't want to find out anything about it, want to go into it completely blind, then you probably shouldn't be watching this video or the video series yet. You should wait until you've read the book and then come back. However, if you have already read the book, or if you want to read the book but you want to find out more in depth about what it is about, what it deals with, how it's structured, and all of those things beforehand, then please stay and watch on. So if you're still here, let me just begin and talk about the Topeka School. So Sarah talked about the plot, talked about the setting, the themes, the structures, the characters. I have very little to add to that. I'll just say that absolutely the plot. This book is autofiction. Adam is a character that is very much based on Ben Lerner, the writer. You know, I would agree with Sarah that the main theme of this book is toxic masculinity, and what's interesting about that here is that it's written by a man, you know, and it's also autofiction, so we're gonna get the chance to be privy to the introspection of a man who grew up in the 90s in the USA, so one who would be a fully fledged adult now in the current political culture where toxic masculinity, I think we can all agree, runs rampant, has to say about it. And what's important, I think, what's interesting about this book is that it shows you Ben Lerner's perspective on how we got here. So this is a prequel of sorts. It's not just a prequel to his previous two novels, but it is also a prequel of sorts into the Trump era, and the era where it doesn't matter what you say, what matters is how you say it. And Trump himself may not be the best example for this because he's hardly articulate, but people surrounded him, and definitely people who do political commentary, I'm thinking about pundits, for instance, have a lot to answer for. And I think Ben Lerner here is able to trace the origins of all that toxic culture, you know, and Ben Lerner has spoken even of Kavanaugh, and that kind of man is who we're thinking about rather than Trump himself, I think. This book, however, is set in the 90s, so it's a prequel to that. It's how we got to where we are now, how that all happened in the Clinton era and slightly before. Sarah also explained the structure very well. There are different sections named after characters, so you get some vignettes interspersed, but mostly the brunt of the book are different points of views from different characters. So now, if I may, I'd like to answer Sarah's questions. She asked me a few questions, fascinating questions, at the end of video 1. So I'm gonna answer them one by one in the same order in which she made them. So the first question is, how do you think about books that are lauded as critical darlings? Do they influence your approach or how you rate them? Did the structure work for you? Okay, these are a lot of questions, really. She put this as if, you know, it were just one question, but it's different questions. There's many things here to unpack. So how do I think about books that are lauded as critical darlings? Well, when a book is lauded as a critical darling, and let's face it, the Topeka School is one of those books. It's part of many end-of-the-year lists. And I'm not talking about BookTube here. I'm talking about, I think when she talks about critical darlings, she's talking about the New York Times, the London Review of Books, that kind of thing, you know, not BookTube. So as a booktuber and as a reader, how do I respond to that? Well, often books that are lauded are put on the map for me. like sometimes that's the only way I hear about books, you know. And a book like this was brought to my attention by the sheer number of reviews and the sheer number of podcasts, interviews with the author, that kind of thing. So it was clear that the critical consensus was positive, and critics really wanted me to read this book. So it brought it to my attention, and I thought to give it a go, just to see what the fuss is about. That's what happens. That's how I normally approach books that are critically lauded. It just puts them in the map, and I feel like I need to find out what the fuss is about. So that's number one. Do they influence my approach or how I rate them? No, I'd still approach them in the same way. I approach every book I read in the same way. If you follow my channel, have followed my channel for a while, I tend to cover literary fiction, and I'm not gonna go into what that is. I know what literary fiction is. I think people know what literary fiction is. The Topeka School is an example of literary fiction. Critical darlings are normally literary fiction rather than genre fiction. And I read them all in the same way. I approach them in exactly the same way. I don't care if there is hype. I don't care if they have positive or negative reviews. That doesn't make any difference to me. I don't think it does. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's a matter of self-perception. But I don't think they influence, whether a book is critically lauded influences how I approach it. And how I rate them, it's the same thing. I mean, I use Goodreads, if that's what we're talking about. So the rating system, the star system. So for me, 5-star is an amazing book that I would want to go back to. 4 stars is a great book that I might not want to revisit in the future, but I still think it's good. I still think it's great, right? 3 stars, it's a book that it's good, but didn't work as a whole, or I had problems with certain aspects of it. 2 stars is a bad book, and 1 star is a book that I just couldn't possibly recommend to anyone, not even my worst enemy. So whether a book is critically lauded or not doesn't influence how I rate it. Now, did the structure work for me? It's a completely different question, and I have thoughts on that. And this is something that I discussed with Sarah when we were doing the body read, and she'll remember this. Yeah, I have problems with books that change point of view. I think that can work. And there are many examples there. And one of the books that I've been reading and struggling with for a while is the Short History of 7 Killings, that has a similar structure in that it uses different characters and it jumps from character to character. So you go from first-person narrative into first-person narrative into first-person narrative, but all the first-person characters are different, right? So you're changing perspective. So I feel that's a very playful thing. I think it could be overdone. I think it could be hella confusing. In this case, it wasn't all that confusing for the most part. I think it worked. It was... Okay, let me backtrack a little bit. It was hella confusing at the beginning, and I'm actually grateful to Sarah, because at the beginning I did not know what the hell was going on. The book just goes straight into something that I just couldn't make head nor tails out of. And it was just through talking to Sarah and going through the plot and how we interpreted what was going on in the book that I was able to anchor myself and really get the key to this text. So if you are going to read this book, if you haven't read this book yet, just be aware of that. It can be very confusing because of the structure. Now, did it work for me? I was confused at the beginning. Then it kind of worked. But one of the risks that this kind of structure has is that I like some sections much better than others. And for me, the sections that were narrated from Jane is Adam's mother. Adam's the main character, is the Ben Lerner alter ego. So Jane's sections, I don't really want to call them chapters. Her sections were, to me, the most successful, the most successful ones, the most satisfying as a reader, the ones that make sense, the ones that make me interested in the story. And that brings me to the second question. What do you think of Adam as a protagonist? What were we supposed to think about him? And did I? Okay, so thanks, Sarah, for this question. What do I think of Adam as the protagonist? Well, he's a prick, isn't he? And I think you're supposed to read him as a prick. I think you're supposed to also read him as somebody who changes. The novel covers a lot of ground, and as Sarah also discussed in her videos, there are some temporally jumps, particularly when in the sections that are told from the father's perspective. But yeah, Adam is supposed to be an example of Maxic? That's toxic masculinity, which is Maxic, right? Toxic masculinity. But I think he's supposed to have an arch, and I didn't see that. And in fact, I have a question for Sarah about this, because I want her to talk more about it. Yeah, but Adam is a total prick. I would not want to spend a single second in the company of somebody like him, and I'm afraid I have in people like Adam. I was gonna say I have people like Adam in my life. I don't think I do, but I've met them. You know, I'm familiar with them. And what were we supposed to think about him? Yeah, I think we're supposed to think that he's a prick, and I did. Next question. How did the parents work for you as characters? Okay, I think the father is supposed to be emasculated, but he was a very flat character. For me, I don't think he came alive. I don't think he was fully fleshed out. I think, however, that the character of the mother, Jane, was fully fleshed out, and she's by far my favorite character. And I have a question about Jane at the end of this video for Sarah, so I don't really want to go too much into that, because I'm more interested to think what Sarah thinks about Jane than what I think myself. But yeah, there was some interaction between the parents that I thought it was interesting. The novel at some point got into the realm of the soap opera there, with the relationship of the parents. And don't get me wrong, I love soap operas, but I don't expect that kind of thing in a literary fiction novel. There are hints of a possible affair between the father and the mother's best friend, Seema. But the thing is, as a queer reader, right? I'm here to give my response to this book. You know, as a queer reader, I'm just tired of books about straight, heterosexual couples who cheat on each other, and it's all a big deal. I'm just bored. I've seen it so much. I've seen it done so often. Frankly, I don't care. Okay, let's talk about something that I really care about. And when I said I don't care, I don't mean I don't care about the question. I just don't care about that kind of thing, the affair and all of that. Anyway, next question. Next question from Sarah is, given that this is such an American book, it's a period piece, it's set in the American Midwest, it has a lot of pop culture references to Ross Perot, the Westboro Baptist Church, I think that's what they call each other, raps and lyrics. Was that difficult to relate to, being outside the US? Okay, I think it could be. So if you're watching this, you don't live in the US, or you're not American, you might struggle with some of those references. Now, I'm not American and I don't live in the US, but I do have very close links to the US that I'm not going to go into in this video, but I know a lot of people and I have family there. And actually, I have family in the Midwest. So that wasn't a challenge for me in general. It was more about the period rather than the place, right? So Kansas, fine. The Midwest, fine. Rap lyrics, I'm not hugely into rap, but I'm aware of it, The pop culture reference, a lot of the political references were easy for me to grasp the significance of. There was just one that I didn't get, and I actually went over it. I just went over it. I just didn't even notice it. And through our conversation in our buddy reads, I noticed that I didn't know anything about it. And that was Ross Perot, which was one of those third-party candidates that pop up in presidential elections in the US. So I didn't know him, but I think that's more to do with the time period, I'm familiar with Jill Stein, for instance, who was a third-party candidate, really the biggest third-party candidate in the election that got us Trump. But I just couldn't remember as far back as the 90s. So for me, the challenge was more the 90s rather than America, if you see what I mean. But I think beware of this. If you're not in the US, it's an extremely American book, and you may struggle with some of the references if you're not au fait. But you know, there's nothing like Wikipedia couldn't solve. If you come across something, just look it up. And also, you know, I read a lot of classics, and there's so many references to 19th century France and Britain and the British Empire and things like that I can come across. And you know, and I read the Iliad last year. I mean, you know, a lot of things that I didn't get. So I think that's part of reading. And if you are into literary fiction, you have to be prepared for this kind of thing. And yeah, so yeah, the time period was more of a challenge than the place it was set in. Oh, I love the next question. Sarah asked me if I had read any reviews of the book, and if I could share one or two of those reviews, and if they align with your thoughts. And I read a lot of reviews for this book, but I have two that I want to very briefly talk about. And of course, you'll find links to both of them in the description box, in the show notes down below. So one of the reviews is from the Los Angeles Review of Books, and the other one is from the Atlantic. So the one in the Atlantic, it's more accessible, I think. They're both accessible for free on the internet, but it's a little bit easier to follow. You know, it's a little bit less in-depth, a little bit more superficial, but very good. And it's written by Jordan Kistner, and the review is called Boy Interrupted. Ben Lerner, portraitist of talkative men, explores the roots of white male rage. I'm not sure about that white male rage thing. I think the book does do that. So here's what I'm talking about, this review in particular. I think the book does that, but I take issue with the term white male rage, because it feels like we are allowing it to exist and we're justifying it in a way, and I'm not here for that really. But the book is written by a white male who, just to use this term, this phrase, and he explores this. Whether he does it successfully or not, wait until the end of this video and I'll let you know what I think about that. But yeah, that's the angle of this review that came out on October 2019 on The Atlantic. And then the other one, the Los Angeles Review of Books, goes a little bit deeper, quite a bit deeper, and it's by Natasha Boyd. This one I really liked because it goes really in depth, and it puts this book in relation with the trilogy that Ben Lerner intended. So Ben Lerner wrote two previous novels, one called 10:04 and the other one Leaving the Atocha Station. And this one is the third in the trilogy, the Topeka School, but it's supposed to work as a prequel to those two. Now, I haven't read 10:04 and Leaving the Atocha Station, and you know, I don't think you need to read those to understand this book, because it's also a prequel. So you know, it makes sense to start with the Topeka School and then go back to the other two, I guess, because I haven't read them, like I say. But I appreciated that in this review, this book is put in the context of the other previous books, so that gives you a lot of information that I think it's useful to approach and interpret the Topeka School. It certainly helped me. Okay, two more questions to go. The next one is, given that you're reading this book overseas, I wonder about the book cover of the edition you're reading. How does the book art work for you? And what do you think? Okay, so I'm reading this overseas, obviously. I'm reading this on my little subtropical island, far away from the US, on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. But I read an ebook. So, you know, it's hard for me to answer this question. However, the cover that I'm familiar with, which you can see now on the screen, is the one that I'll talk about, because that's the one I'm familiar with. And whenever I picture the book, I picture this cover. So it has that kind of black tornado. I think it's a picture that is quite a few years old, because of the cars in the picture. And I think it works well. It's an ugly cover, I think. It kind of, I don't find it appealing. I don't find it like, that's a book I would want to read if I was basing my opinion on the cover, just merely on the cover. But having read the book, I get what the cover is trying to do. It's like an allegory for the destruction of male rage and toxic masculinity. I guess what the cover says, but to me that cover also would make me think that the book is quite angry, and I don't think the book is angry. I think it explores anger and rage, or at least it attempts to, but the book is not an angry book in itself. I didn't think. There's a lot of hatred in there. I mean, there's a Westboro Baptist Church, and Sarah explained who they are in her videos. I'm not going to go back into that, and also I don't want to give them free advertising on my channel. They have enough of that as it is. But you know, yeah, the book deals a lot with anger and rage, so I think it's a good cover for the book. It is, but I don't find it appealing. I would prefer like a blank cover, I think, maybe. And finally, Sarah wanted to know my overall, well, my verdict on this novel. Okay, well, this novel didn't work for me. I did not like it. The best thing about reading this novel was reading it with Sarah. So it didn't quite work for me. I didn't think that Adam had a good development. I don't think Adam was developed right. The ending came about too abruptly to me, and I did not buy it because I did not see that transition from someone who is really a toxic white male in the Midwest to then at the end someone who is woke, you know. I did not buy that because I didn't see how that happened. You know, the book didn't give me that. Also, the fragmentary structure that I talked a little bit about earlier, yeah, that didn't quite make the book come together for me. I would have preferred something a little bit, I think for this story, for this particular story, something linear would have worked better. And this is autofiction, so dude, Ben, if you're writing autofiction, don't put words into, talk about yourself. I just want to know what you think, you know, and how you developed, you know. Mentioning your parents is fine. Now using them as characters is also fine. I think, you know, you don't want autofiction to be a monologue, but it just didn't work. I think autofiction works best, I think, if it's just a first person narration from Adam. I think I would have preferred that, but that's not the book that he was trying to make. And going back to how I approach books and the difference in which I approach novels or fiction compared to Sarah's approach, the main thing is to see what the writer is trying to do, and then see if he did it correctly. I see what he was trying to do, and I think it kind of works at what he was trying to do, except at the end when it just really doesn't. That was the worst thing for me. I don't know if that makes any sense. This book is really hard to talk about. You know, if you've made it this far into this video, you've probably noticed how I struggled sometimes to formulate clear thoughts about this book. I'm hoping that Sarah would be a lot clearer than me. I think she will be a little bit more fluent than I possibly can be about this book. It's a book that infuriated me. It frustrated me at the beginning, like I said, and I probably would have bailed on it when I was confused at the beginning after reading a good 100 pages. Hadn't it not been for Sarah clarifying some of the plot points and the possibility that I had to discuss what I thought was going on and ask questions about what was going on to her. And then after that it was, I'm not going to say it was plain sailing, but it was a lot easier and more satisfying as a reading experience. But overall, I did not like it. I did not like The Topeka School by Ben Lerner. Thank you, Sarah, for your questions. Now I have a few questions for you. Number one, what do you think of Jane, the character Jane? Number two, given that The Topeka School is a sort of prequel to Lerner's previous two novels, would you now be interested in reading them? Question number three, public speaking is prominent in the novel. What do you think the way debating is discussed? Tell us about US politics and public life. Adam can be seen as an example of toxic masculinity. Do you agree with that, first of all? And if you do you think he's a redeemable character? I'm particularly interested in this question, in the answer to this question. And finally, what's your overall verdict? If you want to find out Sarah's answers to all these questions and her final verdict on this book, and I know I definitely want to, go back to her channel, look out for the playlist. You can also see the playlist on my channel. You know, there are all the different ways in which you can find the third video. When I publish this, her video will not be out there, but if you're watching this in the future, the video might already be there, in which case you might also find a link to it in the description box here in the show notes for this video of mine. So yeah, thanks Sarah for having, for sharing this with me, for starting this In Conversation series with me on the Topeka School, for a fantastic buddy read, for being a friend and a great reader and a great person to discuss books with. And thanks everyone for watching this video and Sarah's video. Thank you. If you're new to my channel, welcome. And anyone who is a friend of Sarah's is a friend of mine, so you're welcome. And yeah, thanks everyone for watching. I hope to see you again very soon. Watch out for video 3. Talk to you soon. Bye bye. Take care.